I never ever thought a story about a takeout dinner would end with my neighbor, the grand dame of the entire development, being escorted away in the back of a police cruiser, handcuffs glinting in the late afternoon sun. But that's exactly what happened. And it's the story of how an HOA president learned, the absolute hardest way, that a petty fiefdom ends exactly where the felony line begins. See, I had just moved into Willow Creek Preserve. It's one of those picture-perfect suburban enclaves, right? Every shrub is sculpted, every driveway pressure-washed, every house looks exactly like the next. It felt less like a neighborhood and more like a carefully curated museum exhibit. And the curator, the self-appointed queen of this meticulously trimmed domain, was a woman named Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was early 60s, always dressed in expensive leisure wear, and had this architectural, platinum blonde bob that looked like it could withstand a hurricane. She was the HOA president, a position she treated less like community service and more like a lifetime appointment to absolute monarchy. I'm a data scientist. I work brutal hours from home, and my primary form of social interaction is usually with my Uber Eats driver. So after a 60-hour coding sprint that left me borderline hallucinating, I decided to celebrate with a reward, a perfect medium-rare Kobe steak dinner from the city's best Japanese spot. The tab? About $75, delivery included. I was tracking the little icon on my phone, heart pounding like a kid waiting for Santa. "Driver has arrived," the app chirped. 5 minutes passed. No knock, no ring. Just a photo confirmation of the food sitting patiently on the wrong porch, a teal porch. That distinctive, irritatingly perfect teal porch 3 houses down. I called the driver, who sounded utterly bewildered. "The lady, she was expecting it," he stammered. "She used your last name, said you were indisposed. She had this look, man." I didn't want to argue. That was my first true meeting with Eleanor Vance. I walked down there, took a deep breath, and tried to be the reasonable adult. When she opened the door, the rich, savory smell of my perfectly marbled Kobe wafted right out. "Excuse me, Eleanor," I said, leaning into the formality. "I think there's been a mistake. The driver delivered my dinner here by accident." Her smile was immediate, wide, and entirely devoid of warmth, a predatory, sugar-coated grin. "Oh, Jake, I'm afraid there's been no mistake at all, dear." I received it quite intentionally. My stomach dropped, both from hunger and shock. "Intentionally? That's my food, I paid for it. Could you please just hand it over?" She actually chuckled, a dry, crystalline sound. "Tisk, tisk. Section 14, subsection B of the Willow Creek Guidelines, dear. It explicitly prohibits the idling of vendor vehicles for more than 3 minutes between the hours of 6 and 8 p.m. That vehicle was idling. And as president, it is my sworn duty to confiscate unauthorized property that constitutes a clear community violation. Consider this your friendly first warning, new neighbor." "Confiscate?" I just stared at her. "You stole my dinner." "I've already disposed of it properly," she lied, the aroma of my steak getting stronger. "You'll receive a notice of violation tomorrow." "Welcome to Willow Creek, Jake." And before I could even formulate a coherent English sentence, the door clicked shut. I walked home in a daze, $75 poorer, and just ordered a massive, defiant, spite-filled pepperoni pizza. That night I couldn't sleep. It wasn't about the money, it was the pure, arrogant power she exhibited. The next morning, the violation notice arrived on embossed linen paper. The rule, of course, was complete fiction. But when I emailed the management company, all I got were automated responses, a digital shrug. I thought about escalating, hiring a lawyer, but honestly, who wants to start a war over a steak? It felt pathetic. So I let it go. But Eleanor didn't. Over the next 6 weeks, a pattern emerged, and it became terrifyingly clear that Eleanor Vance wasn't just enforcing imaginary rules. She was stalking my delivery schedule. It was like she had a built-in sensor for my hunger. Sometimes, she'd corner the drivers right at the mouth of the cul-de-sac, claiming I'd called the restaurant and canceled the order, but forgot to tell the driver. Once, she actually put on a pair of designer reading glasses, pretended to be my personal assistant, and signed for a massive tray of pad thai, informing the poor teenager, and I quote, "Mr. Harrison has a sensitive stomach and must vet all external consumables." I lost nearly $300 in food. It stopped being a financial issue and became a psychological one. I was being relentlessly personally targeted by a petty tyrant, and no one, absolutely no one, would stand up to her. I started digging. I installed a high-definition doorbell camera with crystal-clear audio. I sent formal, documented complaints to every single board member. Every time. Nothing. One night, Jerry across the street, a quiet guy, retired postal worker, leaned over my fence and whispered, "Don't bother. Jake. She got the Millers fined $2,000 last year for having the wrong shade of blue on their pool cover. Before that, she threatened to lien on the Chen's house because the grass near their mailbox was a quarter-inch too long." Nobody, Jerry stressed, messes with Eleanor Vance. That was the night I stopped looking for justice and started looking for leverage. I sat down with my laptop, not to code, but to research. I wasn't just a homeowner trying to get his dinner. I was a man of data looking for the weak spot in her algorithm. And I found it. In our state jurisdiction, theft is classified as grand larceny, a felony crime, when the value of the property taken exceeds $500. $500. I realized I wasn't going to win this war by playing fair. I was going to win it by weaponizing bureaucracy, by turning her own obsessive rule-following against her. I pulled out all the stops. I placed the mother of all takeout orders from the most exclusive, ludicrously expensive place in the city, the one that requires a full 48-hour notice for large platters. I ordered the Emperor's Feast sushi platter, several cuts of rare A5 Wagyu that you could only get special order, and 2 bottles of high-end, vintage Japanese whiskey. Total cost? $554.22. It was outrageous, it was financially irresponsible. But I wasn't buying dinner, I was buying an arrest warrant. I waited near the window, my heart doing that anticipatory pound again. But this time it wasn't hunger, it was pure. Cold, calculated exhilaration. Sure enough, exactly 2 minutes after the luxury sedan with the gourmet delivery sign rolled into our cul-de-sac, Eleanor Vance emerged from her teal fortress. She moved with purpose, like a general intercepting supplies on the battlefield, her perfectly coiffed hair bobbing like a weapon. I watched through the camera feed as she approached the driver. I could hear her voice, dripping with that familiar saccharine authority. "Oh, thank you, young man." Community guidelines mandate that the president must personally inspect and receive all large-scale, potentially disruptive vendor deliveries. Mr. Harrison is indisposed. The driver, clearly intimidated by the sheer aura of entitled power radiating from Eleanor, stammered, handed over the massive, expensive bags, and practically fled back to his car. Instead of storming out, instead of fighting, I took a deep, steadying breath, and I reached for my phone. I didn't call the HOA. I didn't call the restaurant. I called the police non-emergency line. "I'd like to report a theft," I said, keeping my voice utterly level. "My neighbor, Eleanor Vance, has just stolen property valued at over $500 from my home. I have video documentation of this incident, her repeated prior thefts, and the full digital receipt. It took 20 minutes, the slowest 20 minutes of my life, but eventually, 2 patrol cars glided silently into the cul-de-sac, lights flashing softly, respectfully. No sirens. They approached the teal door and rang the bell. Eleanor's reaction was priceless. She opened the door with her usual flawless poise, ready to lecture a pair of uniformed men on the sanctity of Willow Creek's aesthetic standards. But the moment she saw the serious, non-amused faces of the 2 officers, the practiced smile dissolved into confusion, and then, immediately, outrage. I watched her gesture wildly, undoubtedly reciting the imaginary section numbers of her imaginary code. One of the officers eventually broke away and walked toward my porch. "Sir," he began, trying to maintain neutrality, "your neighbor claims she was acting in her capacity as HOA president, confiscating a delivery that she alleges violates community guidelines." I didn't even bother arguing. I pulled up the full official bylaws on my tablet, highlighting the lack of any rule regarding food delivery. Then I opened the doorbell camera footage, the latest clip of her smugly taking my $554 dinner, followed by the compiled montage of the previous 5 weeks. The officer watched the sequence, his face hardening with every single clip. "And the total value of today's order, sir?" he asked finally. I held up the digital receipt, perfectly centered on my screen. 554.22s, includes 2 bottles of rare Japanese whiskey and an A5 Wagyu side order. He just nodded. Wait here, please. I watched from my driveway as he rejoined his partner and Eleanor. The conversation quickly became heated, the officers no longer listening to her ranting about vendor aesthetics. And then it happened. The most profoundly satisfying moment of my entire adult life. One of the officers reached for his belt, pulling out the steel cuffs, while the other began the process of reading her Miranda rights. Eleanor Vance's perfectly sculpted face went the exact shade of overcooked lobster. Her manicured hands flailed wildly as the cold metal snapped around her wrists behind her back. She was escorted, protesting and sputtering, to the police cruiser. She looked less like the Queen of Willow Creek and more like a terrified, entitled woman who had finally run straight into a concrete wall of legal consequences. Later that evening, one of the officers came back to take my formal statement. Your neighbor is being charged with grand larceny, he explained matter-of-factly. Theft over $500 is a felony here. She claimed she was disposing of the goods for community safety. But we found the entire 554 order, the sushi, the Wagyu, the whiskey, perfectly preserved in her Sub-Zero refrigerator. He gave a small, weary smile. It seems she was under the impression that the HOA Constitution somehow supersedes the penal code. The neighborhood erupted. The following night, the emergency HOA meeting was standing room only. The board sat stiffly at the front, looking utterly miserable. One by one, my neighbors, the quiet ones, the ones who always nodded politely, stood up and recounted years of Eleanor's petty, unchallenged tyranny. The Millers talked about the pool cover fine. The Chens showed photos of the letter about their grass. When it was my turn, I didn't say a word. I just plugged my phone into the community center's projector and played the compilation. Eleanor, in her various states of entitlement, sometimes in her bathrobe, sometimes in gardening gloves, always with that practiced smile, intercepting my dinner, over and over and over. The footage spoke louder than any speech. The board voted unanimously to remove her from office that night, and the vice president, a soft-spoken gentleman named George, announced they were launching a full audit of the last 3 years of HOA finances. 2 days later, I was working on my deck when I heard a timid knock. I opened the door. It wasn't the Eleanor I knew. The iron-fisted grand dame was gone. Her hair was limp, her expensive makeup was sparse, and her eyes were puffy and glassy. She looked fragile, frayed around the edges. My attorney says I have to make restitution, she said, her voice small and brittle. She thrust a thick, pristine white envelope into my hands. This covers everything you lost, plus the interest. I took the envelope without opening it. Thank you. Eleanor. She lingered there on my porch, glassy-eyed, clearly waiting for something more. Absolution, perhaps, or a promise to drop the charges. Instead, I asked her the only thing that mattered to me. Was it worth it, Eleanor? All that effort, all that control, all that time. Over a man's dinner? Her mask finally cracked. Her composure snapped, and the real fear leaked out. You don't understand, she hissed, her voice shaking with residual anger and pure terror. I maintain the standards here. Everything! And now, I might lose my real estate license over this misunderstanding. Do you have any idea what a criminal record will do to my career? My reputation? She wasn't a tyrant anymore. She was just a woman terrified of losing status, finally facing a consequence that her petty authority couldn't bully away. That wasn't my intention, I told her, honestly. I just wanted to eat my dinner in peace. She opened her mouth to argue one last time, but then the sweet, familiar chime of my phone cut through the silence. I glanced at the screen and smiled. Excuse me, Eleanor, I said, stepping slightly forward and enjoying the moment of pure, quiet power. That's my lunch delivery. And this time, I paused, looking directly at her. I think it's actually going to make it to my door. Call to action. That was the end of Eleanor Vance's reign. She pled out, took a deal to avoid prison time, but the felony charge stuck. She moved out of Willow Creek a month later, her house selling quickly and quietly. So tell me, Was I wrong to use the law, to weaponize a felony charge, to fight a petty bully who was otherwise untouchable? Did I go too far? Or is that the only way to deal with an HOA Karen who believes their little rule book is gospel? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and tell me your worst HOA horror story.